as they do on TV. Thank you for this, for everybody joining us. My name is Beto Duran. This is the Living the Dream speaker series aimed at Latino reporters. What it is, I have no clue. Honestly, I was looking around a couple weeks ago and I actually talked to George about this. And I said, how do we do something during this quarantine to help out the aspiring journalists in different departments? And so I came up with this idea to have a speaker series because it was, how do we get people involved? And everybody says, I want to help, I want to help. And during this quarantine, we're all stuck and everybody's just doing Instagram Live and messing around. I'm like, let's do something productive. So I decided to do this on my own, not associated with any association. I'm a freelancer, so I could do it. And what this is entitled is Living the Dream, covering the NBA from the Latino perspective. Once again, my name is Beto Duran. I used to be a reporter at ESPN Radio. I'm a freelancer now. Mark Medina is from the USA Today. Paolo Uggetti from The Ringer, and George Sedano from ESPN TV and Radio. We have 30 attendees. And if you're not Latino, well, then you can hang out, but there's going to be a heavy Latino slant at this and the buy for it. Every single day this week, I am doing different webinars. And if you have one, if you're a Latina, tomorrow, Claudia Trejos is going to be the main one. Wednesday, we're doing something for NFL and baseball. Thursday, we have a play-by-play one. And Friday, if you're a sports writer, you have a chance to get critiqued by Angel Rodriguez and Ileana Roman from the Orlando Sentinel, 2 sports editors. So the spiel is, this isn't like, oh, let's Viva la Raza attitude. No, it's not that. It's how do we get you to where we are at? How do we help you? And one of the things that is lacking in the Latino media side, specifically on the sports side, is that mentorship. There is no real pipeline for it. I'm 41, and when I started doing this as an intern when I was 20, I looked around, there weren't many. Now I look around, there weren't many. And what you're looking at today is going to be obviously geared towards basketball. It's going to be a roundtable with George, Mark, and Paulo, and your questions could be asked at the end. Probably won't have much time to get to your questions, but if you're coming into the seminar and wherever you are, you should know who you're dealing with. You should know that Mark Medina used to work at the LA Daily News. You used to know that Mark Medina was covering the Warriors. You should know that Paolo Uggetti is from USC and he covers the basketball for The Ringer. You should know George Sedano used to work at Fox Sports Radio. The most important thing is do your research before you go there. So don't ask questions like, hey, tell me about your background, because you can Google the background. And with that, let's get going. If you guys have questions, we'll ask them later on. The angle is the covering the Latinos in the NBA. Obviously, there aren't many of them. But if you look around and when you go into a press box or media room, George, start with you. I was asking you, hey, who do we know that covers NBA that happens to be Latino? And we're not saying in Spanish or anything like that. We came up with Mark Medina, Paulo, you, Israel Gutierrez, and then
that's pretty much it. I feel like I mean, maybe there's someone I'm missing that covers it in English, but I feel like I've covered the gamut there, right? Paolo and Mark, am I missing anyone?
I can't think of anyone else. I do know there's a Pelicans reporter with ESPN.
Oh, yeah.
Other than that, I can't really think.
Yeah, there was. He actually reached out to him, and Lopez is actually Creole. He said his.
Oh, he's not. Okay, Latino. Oh, okay.
Oh, wow. Good to know.
He did his lineage 7 generations ago. A Honduran moved to New Orleans, and the name has just come down.
Oh, I see.
I'm a Creole kid, so I can't help you here. But that's part of why we want to have this out here is, George, when you go around the NBA covering for ESPN, you look around and it's like, we all want to be known as just being the best reporter.
Yeah.
But also as the elder statesman here, it's like, wait a minute, how do we get more people involved, right?
Yeah, look, I think, and I've had this conversation, so I'm not speaking out of turn, right? So I've had this conversation with people at ESPN over the years, and it's just like, we under-index when it comes to Hispanics. Like, this isn't something that is not out in the open. And what I mean by under-indexing is you look at the general population and you look at, in comparison, how many Latino reporters there are at ESPN in any sport. For that matter. And yeah, we don't index properly in that situation. And it's not an ESPN problem, because to be honest, when you look at the rest of the TV landscape specifically, and I'm not trying to call out Fox, CBS, NBC or whatever, but, or, the NFL Network or whatever. But they're certainly way worse. If we under index, then they don't even index in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So I think that becomes a challenge. So it's important for us to continue to beat that drum with the people that do the hiring, I think, as much as anything else, and be like, hey, man, like you can find people that can do this job that also are representative of the particular audiences, right? There's a reason the NBA specifically does Noche NBA, right? Every single year, and they do it in different markets, and it's generally the Latino markets, right? New York, LA, Miami, the Texas cities, etc., Chicago. But I do think it's important on our end to continue to kind of beat that drum. You get a lot of reporters, I think, that are Latino on baseball, which, look, makes sense. And I still think we do a better job there overall. 33%, I believe, of the sport is Latino, and we don't have 33% of the reporters being Latino in that sport. So
that's why we're trying to get those numbers up with a lot of the people attending today are college students. And shout out to Gary Mesker, professor at Long Beach State, who has some of his students here. Paulo, you're the young one here. You're what, 25? And
about to turn 25.
I even told you this morning when I called you and finally got a track of you, I'm like, I kind of didn't want to have you on the panel, and it's nothing against you, because you haven't gone and experienced as much because you didn't do preps. You didn't move to Midland, Texas. You didn't put in that. Not to say that you haven't grinded, because I've been reading you since you were a freshman at USC, and you've earned it, and you're damn good at what you do. But when you move around and you start looking around, you're like, wait a minute, damn, does anybody look like me?
Right. I mean, I definitely got lucky in the sense, like you mentioned, I didn't have to go through the usual traditional system where you go to a smaller market, move up. And I'm sure, a lot of people can tell you about that path. But yeah, I mean, obviously got a huge opportunity with the Ringer in terms of just like the timing of it was perfect. I think I was going to do their summer internship, but then I ended up doing their spring internship and got in. I think I was the last one to get in. And then I just kind of just put my head down and was like, okay, well, clearly they want to do more basketball, and I can do this right now. So then I just started doing a lot of that, and that ended up being kind of the entry point to the job, because like I always like loved basketball and wanted to do that, but I wasn't necessarily like, like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. That was just mostly what I read. And so the opportunity opened up. It was like perfect timing in terms of that sense. But yeah, as far as like seeing people like us, it's crazy because like when I see George, it's like I almost feel like, oh, right. Like, there's like there are some of us out here, right? But it's like you kind of internalize the fact that it's not prevalent until you see somebody else and you're like, oh, well, where's like the rest of everybody and whatnot. So, hopefully that's something that can grow, going forward.
Well, that's why we all have the secret handshake whenever I run into them at games. I don't know if people know about that, but
it really is. And Medina, I look, and here's the thing. Everybody that's on this panel, completely different backgrounds. I'm born and raised LA, where my mom and dad are from Mexico. Jorge Cubano, who can be Jorge or George, wherever you want to be, son of immigrants in Miami. Paulo, Salvadorian, so you're the only Salvadorian reporter covering, I think, any sport. And Medina, and we're going to be completely honest, Medina's a kid that I used to harass when he first started working for the LA Times because he was helping out with their blog. And I was like, Mark Medina, cool, a Mexican. And he's like, And at first,
I don't fit the par is what you're saying.
No, because at first Medina would like, we're in the Laker media room. I would mess with Medina like, dude, there's another brown one. All right, cool. And like, once again, this isn't like Viva la Raza kind of stuff, but it's just more of like, when you see somebody it's like, all right, cool, let me help them out. And Medina was coming around. That's when the Lakers LA Times had a blog, he had a video, Hustler, and I'm like, let me help this kid out, right? And I started talking to him in Spanish, not a lot, just one or two words. Like, what the hell? Like, Medina, don't be that kid that forgets your roots or anything like that. Then I kind of find out he's from York, Pennsylvania.
Yeah. So, Beto, I've experienced like both ends of the spectrum here, right? Where, I mean, let's just be frank. I've been very blessed and thankful for, having a good family and opportunities. But as far as just the background, so I grew up in York, Pennsylvania, which is predominantly white. My whole family background is my dad was born and raised in Mexico City. His whole side of the family is from Mexico, but my mom's white. But because it's York, Pennsylvania, small town, very conservative, not a lot of diversity, I stood out like a sore thumb. But then when I go to Los Angeles, I'm kind of looked at, you're actually Latino? Like, you seem white. You have a last name, but you don't speak Spanish. So, like, I totally get experiencing both sides of the coin there.
And Medina, also, we're going to be completely honest here. Did you not come on an internship because of a Latino?
Yeah. So I signed up with the LA Times MetPro program. And, I think when you're looking at my case in particular, it falls under the umbrella of like a lot of different tentacles here where, it's great that I got this opportunity because, I'm part Latino, but the LA Times, they have this program, the MetPro program, and part of it was to increase the diversity of the newsroom. And that's very important, but also because of the times we're in where, they have been going through rounds of layoffs in the newspaper industry, that became, for all intents and purposes, a backhanded way to add people to the news staff because they're having to do rounds of layoffs. And because we're young, like that was an inexpensive alternative. So, I think with that, I was blessed that you have this opening, but it's a lot of high risk, high reward because I don't know how the program is now, but when I was entering that, they looked at it as almost like a feeding system where, okay, they have a batch of interns, but if they're not good, well, we'll snuff them out. We have no investment. So it was very sink or swim. And thankfully I was able to not sink. But at the same time, you just don't know if there's those same kind of opportunities elsewhere.
And Angel Rodriguez, former sports editor of the LA Times, is actually watching right now. And
nice. Hi, Angel.
Yeah, we've all talked about how getting more in the pipeline. And as he said, Medina nailed it on the MetPro program. And this is something that when I go and speak at Long Beach State at Gary's class, I'm like, there are programs out there. You might only be half, use it. It doesn't matter. If there's a Salvadorian soccer scholarship writer award, Paulo's going to get it. And George, at the same time, we can get in via these little steps, right? You just need a little crack in the door. But if you suck, right? Yeah. Especially at ESPN.
Yeah, listen, at some point or another, your talent is going to be what carries you, right? And look, in all our professions, there's a lot of talented people who don't make it, right? So it isn't just about that. It's about talent. It's about your work ethic. It's about relationships. I think all those things really matter. Like I've learned, I've been in this business now 20 years, and I've learned that
and as George starts talking about diversity, his computer goes out at ESPN. I'm just saying it.
He was about to get points on around
the horn. All of a sudden, you got censored. You're back.
I'm back. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. That's weird. So to answer your question, yes, there's talent matters. If you suck, you suck. And ultimately, it's not just about talent. I know plenty of talented people in this business who didn't make it. For one reason or another. Maybe they didn't have the right work ethic. Maybe they were bad at networking and they were bad at relationships. And you have to have good relationships, not only with your bosses, but your coworkers, right? Because I think all that stuff matters because ultimately you never know who your next boss is going to be. And look, I'm living it right now. The guy who is on on the radio side, right? At ESPN LA, the guy who's my producer is also one of our bosses. He's the assistant program director. He was my producer. His first job in the business was working with me back in like 2006 or something like that. Now he's my boss. So if that doesn't tell you how small the circle is in this business, nothing else will. So you always have to treat people right. Even if you're having a bad day, man, just be cool. People will understand if you're busy, but just be cool, be nice, be a good teammate. I think all that stuff matters.
Paulo, you got something?
Just pretty much double on what George said, because it's like, I mean, to some of the people maybe listening, it might sound a little daunting because it's like, like, oh, I have to be good, but I also have to network and I also have to, foster these relationships. But at the same time, I have to be, looking for these little openings and whatnot. But I think if you just set yourself up for breaks you know what I'm saying? Like they're going to happen. Like for me, it was basically a combination of like, knowing what to like, just finding something. I think it was like an application for this like Knight Foundation program that was about diversity, and it was taking specifically people of color. And so I applied to it, not really knowing where it would kind of lead. And I got in, and that ended up being the internship program that I did summer before I graduated.
Paulo, what made you apply to this Knight Foundation? How did you even hear about it?
Well, I think it was like a USC newsletter that they were, they always send you a bunch of different things that are, popping up and whatever. And it just looked interesting. And I was like, well, like that's a diversity fellowship. Like at least have some advantage there.
You were looking for that stuff.
Yeah. Well, more generally, I was looking to do something that summer just to figure out what I was going to do with that summer, whether it was an internship or anything like that. So I applied to a couple of internships. I didn't get them, but I got this program, which ended up being an internship that was probably even better than the one I would have gone.
Yeah. This actually comes from Gary Metzger, the professor at Long Beach State. How are you guys going to help students get a foot in the door? And Gary, I think you just got your answer there. That, what Paulo said, you got to be the go-getter to go get it, right? You got to go find that, right? Medina, I know you went to Syracuse, but there's 1,000 students from Syracuse that graduate that didn't take advantage of that. You got to be the go-getter.
Yeah, and I think it cuts both ways. Whether you're at a university or a school or a newspaper that has a big market, has a lot of opportunities, or the other way around, the cream rises to the crop. And it's really a matter of like, how do you strike that balance of a few things here of you're willing to do the grind work and be the first to show up and be there all the time, but not just work hard, work smart, like have an end game and think big picture, but also know how to foster these relationships where it doesn't feel like it's just transactional, it's organic, and you're able to, strike a mix of finding someone who is a mentor, a friend. And so when people reach out to me, I mean, I always want to give back and help wherever I can, but I know from experience and just being on the other end of it, it's a lot more effective if that person doesn't feel like, hey, you're only reaching out to me because you need something from me at this moment. If you're reaching out with the intentions of trying to start a relationship, get feedback on what you do well, and more importantly, what you don't do well, I think that lends itself for it feeling more natural and less contrived, because then once that person feels like they know you more, they're invested, when those times come where there is an opportunity, it'll be much more likely that person will inevitably think of you as opposed to just getting a cold call email.
Yeah, there's a kid on here, Bryce Ronquillo, who goes to Azusa Pacific University, who I've actually helped out, mentored, and he knows I'm hard with them, where he's like, he'll tell me, hey, can you hook this up? I'm like, not in those words, but like, no. But when you develop a relationship, then yeah, we can figure things out. And right, George, like, I know people will say, oh, he's on TV, I'm going to reach out to him, but do they ever really?
Occasionally people do. I think social media has created the avenue to do that, right? And I try my best. Look, I've got a lot of people all over the country that I talk to regularly, right? I check in on them. I check to see if they're doing okay. And they're not always all young people, right? Sometimes people who have been grinding in the business for a long time that are still trying to make that climb, right? And I think that's one of the questions that Professor Metzger has up there now, if we're willing to mentor students. Yeah, look, I don't necessarily feel like it has to be a formal thing, right? Like, I'm willing to help people who are willing to help themselves, right? And if they come to me with something and just kind of like Mark said, where it becomes hey, I've got this, podcast that I do. Do you mind listening to it for a second and just kind of give me your thoughts on it? I've done that with a couple of people locally in LA who have started podcasts, and I've sent them back my feedback. I said, give me, depending on what I was doing, like if it was during the NBA season, when we have a normal NBA season and I'm on a plane every week, I told him, look, give me a minute. Let me get on a plane, because that's when I do most of my podcast listening, and let me listen, and I'll write you a note. So whether it's that stuff on TV, I always encourage people to send me their stuff, right? And I will get to it and just give you my honest thoughts. Like, I'm never afraid to tell you what I think. You may not like it, but hopefully you understand that it would be constructive criticism. So, whether it's quote unquote an actual mentorship where we're talking constantly, maybe there's been one or two that I still have that kind of relationship with. But I also,
George, it's got to go both ways. I can't be going and looking after you, because you got young kids. We got kids, not you, Paulo, but everybody else, like, you got things to do. Yeah. And it's like, hey, you reach out to me.
Yeah, for sure. And Paulo, don't have kids, all right? At least not anytime soon. They're beautiful. They're lovely. Don't get me wrong. But you're 25. Go enjoy being 25.
When you Bill Simmons money, have kids. Right now, no.
Yeah, so don't have kids yet. But yeah, look, I am super open. I have people who hit me up on Instagram or on Twitter all the time, and I will just hit them up back and just be like, hey, here's my email address. Send me a clip. Send me something. Send me one of your samples. I'll read it over, or I'll look at it, or I'll listen to it.
All right, here we go. Gabriel Duarte, high school junior, sports broadcasting is my passion. What school should I seriously be looking at? start with you, Medina.
I mean, the answer is easy. It's Syracuse, right? No, in all seriousness, you know, you look at the elite journalism schools or, you know, even some of the small ones. I don't personally think, even if there are benefits of going to like the good journalism schools, right? It's more about the hands-on experience and what you're able to parlay there. Because when you're working in student media, nothing ever replaces hands-on experience, number one. Number two, a lot of times, because in these normal jobs, you know, people are busy, there's a lack of staffing, a lack of real time. Sometimes the feedback you're getting is no news is good news, right? And that's not a knock on anyone, for anyone I've worked for in the past or currently work for now. It's just the reality. But when I was at school, they made a point of emphasis that they would read over your story with you, give you direct feedback. Same thing at the TV station. So I think it's not so much about, you know, what school it is. It's more about, hey, as long as you get involved with student media and there is that culture of accountability and fostering growth mindset, that's really is what is going to be playing a major factor in your long-term success in terms of opportunities.
And Paulo?
Yeah, I think that for I mean, the question specifically was about broadcasting. I know that USC does kind of put an emphasis on the broadcasting things. Like, I can tell you that because when I was there and I was trying to mostly just write, they still had me doing broadcast stuff, which is great. Like, I actually really appreciate that I got some of that experience. So, you know, I think it's also about what kind of experience you want, because there's a difference, I think, between going to a classic journalism school like Missouri or Syracuse, where you know you're going to get that hands-on training, but also teaching, and something like USC, where part of you might not get it as intensively perhaps, but you are also in a big market where there might be more opportunities to, you know, do something that's a little bit more higher profile or something like that. Like for me, I mean, I got in and right away started doing student media, but that meant that within a year I was covering USC football, which is it's in itself like a very big football program. So that was its own level of exposure that I think helped me out, you know, whereas maybe the nitty gritty.
I first met you were covering USC football, and I'm like,
right.
Because I would cover practice, and I would always go and get the school paper to see who's good. Because there's always somebody watching you, somebody reading you. There's always somebody watching you, right, George? It doesn't matter. I mean, the schools are good. George, you went to where?
FIU.
FIU in Florida.
Yeah, it's a state school. It's no different than Florida State or Florida, but it's like basically I would equate it to like CSUN or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like that would be the equivalent in Miami. I couldn't afford to go to the University of Miami. Mom worked there and we still couldn't afford to go there, even with the employee discount. But anyway, I think it's all about, to be honest, and one of the questions that just popped up a few minutes ago says that it's no secret you got to put in the work. But what about people who have no college experience but are great sports writers trying to make it without a college degree? Is that dream still a reality? Which will lead me to this, okay? You know, Paolo and Mark have mentioned, you know, about the structures within schools, and they've nailed it. And there's not really much I can add to what they've already said. But to answer that particular question, I think that nowadays, because of the digital space, I think that there's more opportunities like that than there have ever been before. Whether it's a YouTube show, whether it's a podcast, whether it's just writing. I mean, Paolo, you work with a guy in Shea Serrano, who is a 3-time New York Times bestseller, I believe, and wasn't a writer by trade when he started. He wrote out of necessity, financial necessity, and was getting paid, you know, a few bucks here and there to write, and became one of the best writers that we have in our particular industry. So I do think, to answer that particular question, I do think it's still possible. And I think the possibilities are more so endless than they've ever been, that you don't have to take the traditional route.
And I'll add to that, and I think the people at Long Beach State have heard it. SC, amazing connections. I wish I would have gone there. Syracuse, amazing connections. Northwestern, amazing connections. For me, junior college, 0 connections. 3 junior colleges, 0 connections. Sometimes I work for people that went to Syracuse and Missouri that have their masters that are working for me. Not an ego thing, but it's what are you going to do with your opportunity? So when you know that you're at the state school or you're a little bit behind connection-wise, it's 2020. Reach out to these fuckers and say, hey, let's go. You're not going to have opportunities coming to you, so step up even more. It's how bad do you want it? You mentioned Shea Serrano. How bad did he want it?
Yeah.
Writing over and over and over. How much rejection did he face? Which leads me to this. George, a good question coming here from Bobby Diaz. What are some of the struggles that you guys went through to get to where you face compared to the struggles that Paulo's faced? Obviously being younger. George, and I'm going to keep it on the Latino side. You know, you're doing radio in Miami. It helps. Once you started going national, did you get any kind of flack? Because I know when I started covering the Lakers, it was, what does a Mexican know about the Lakers? This was 2010 when Twitter started. I'm like, damn.
I'll give you a perfect example. When I was working in Miami, as you pointed out, it's different, right? It's very much like LA in the sense that half the community is Latino. So it you know, you're one of them, right? So it feels like you're part of the particular community. Even though, by the way, there have only been 3 Cuban talk show hosts in the history of sports radio in Miami. Myself,
well, how many Mexicans in LA right now?
Yeah, there's none, which is ridiculous in my opinion.
That's why we claim you.
Yeah, and you know, the other one was Orlando Alzagari. So, but to your point, I think ultimately that when I got to the network and I was doing shows, like I was the main fill-in for Mike Greenberg on Mike and Mike, right? And I would do First Take a ton, and man, you learn very quickly that the internet is a mean place. And a lot of it stems from prejudice, right? Like, yeah, what do you know? Like, what do you know about sports? Like, you never played. You're just some Hispanic kid. You're just some token, right? Like, you get a lot of that stuff, particularly when you're on television. Yep. And this was still, you know, I would say somewhat the early stages of Twitter and things of that nature. We're talking about 2013. Twitter had only been around 4 or 5 years at that particular point. But yeah, there was plenty of that stuff that I had to deal with. And it wasn't until eventually you prove over time, like anything else, you got to earn it. You got to earn the audience trust. You got to connect with a particular audience. And once they see through that, then you're good. It's never going to mean that the internet is not a mean place and that when I'm doing Around the Horn or The Jump or any of these shows, there's not going to be, we're not broadcasting this, right?
No, it's just for us.
All right. So it doesn't mean there isn't going to be some asshole on Twitter that's going to just say something ridiculous to you and be a fucking shithead. But you're always going to have to deal with that. You just got to be able to rise above it and understand you're doing the job the way you're supposed to be doing it. And the majority of people are going to be cool with the way you do it.
And that's how honest we are. So if you're watching this and you're an attendee, don't record this and post it anywhere. Like, just be cool. This is for the attendees only. That's why I'm not broadcasting. I'm not putting it on YouTube anywhere. I'm not Instagram. This is just for you because you decided to register and take the extra steps. So this is for you to take that. So that's what we're having a real.
Yeah. The first rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Medina, how about you?
I've gone through an interesting paradigm here, and part of it's circumstantial, part of it's just my own background, where because I was covering the NBA, you know, the reality is there's not a lot of Latino reporters, and frankly, there's not a lot of times where it's being asked upon you to lean on your Spanish or anything else. But I think because of that, you know, I'm perceived in the NBA that not many players know my background, but then it winds up becoming a pleasant surprise. And where that's come into play has mostly been recently, you know, with everything going on in the political world. I was covering the Warriors. A lot of those guys were outspoken about things the president said or did. And, you know, when he brought up the whole thing about describing, you know, some countries in Africa as shithole countries, like, I obviously had a very broad perspective of why people in the Latino community were offended by that. And I had extensive conversations with David West about that whole thing because he started going after the president on that. And so I think even if I don't have the same real life experiences that they do have, the fact that I have a level of empathy for their circumstances, I think helps. But at the end of the day, and this is more of a negative about me than anything else, but if I was covering baseball, I'd probably be putting more effort into making my Spanish a lot better. Like, the off season, before podcasts became a thing, like my drives to Staples Center and my time in the off season, I was always listening to audio CDs, always practicing my Spanish. And now I feel like I need to listen to all these NBA podcasts that ESPN does and Yahoo and whatever to be on top of the NBA. Yeah. And being honest, like, if I was covering baseball, I'd probably put more of a commitment into, instead of listening to baseball podcasts, just being perfect with my Spanish.
Right, it's different, right, Paulo?
It's very bad right now.
At the Ringer, I got one of the cool things is, even though I am pretty much always covering basketball, like early on, I did get to write some other stories, and I did write a baseball story, and the Spanish helped so much for that story. Like basically all my interviews were in Spanish, and it was crazy. And it was kind of like, man, maybe I should be covering baseball. But no, I mean, I think somebody asked too in the chat, like, how does that, with the NBA, there aren't a lot of Spanish speaking players, but I think it's kind of fun because the few that do speak Spanish, if you do talk to them, they'll get surprised by that and they'll enjoy it. And I think you also have to realize that, for me, I think that over the last year and a half, I realized that there's also a lot of players from Europe that end up playing in the Spanish league and end up learning Spanish fluently. Like somebody like Luka Doncic, for example, he's fluent in Spanish, and like if you can talk to him, I don't know, the access with him could be difficult, but it's like one of those things where if you do talk to him in Spanish, like I think that will unlock a different side of the player that you're not sure of. I think I did that with like Juancho Hernan Gomez, was on the Nuggets for a bit. I talked to him in Spanish. So it's like, it's a cool thing to have for sure. It's maybe not as useful, but it definitely helps you connect with certain players. And I know that if there's a player on the team that I need to, they're coming through Staples Center and I need to do a story on them, like I know that I can at least kind of rely on the one player that speaks Spanish to at least gives me a different perspective, something interesting for the story.
Well, that was the thing with me and when Pau Gasol was with the Lakers. I mean, perfect English, but just saying a couple words to him in Spanish, the guard comes down. That's what I noticed. You mentioned some of the European guys that play in Spain. The guard immediately, hey, ¿qué pasó? Whoa, wait a minute. And that little angle gets you in. Anything you can do to get your foot in the door, right, George, is just huge for you.
Yeah, I agree. The Luka thing was something, my colleague Mina Kimes for ESPN, the magazine, may the magazine rest in peace, was one of the first feature writers to write a story about Luka when he was still in Spain. And she told me, because, obviously when we do their games on ESPN, we get a chance to interview these guys on a green screen or whatever. We talk to all the coaches off camera. And with Luka, she's like, talk to him in Spanish. He'll be a completely different person as soon as you do it. And I did. And he was stunned that somebody would talk to him in Spanish. Now he's gotten a little more used to it, I think, particularly when he comes into certain cities, as Paulo was mentioning, particularly LA, right? But yeah, there are guys like that. Al Horford is one of those guys that you talk to, and he's more than happy to do it. JJ Barea, Puerto Rico, right? Like you can talk to him. Even guys who don't necessarily speak Spanish, like the Lopez brothers, right? I had this conversation with, I did a Bucks game where Brooke had an awesome game, right? And he was the player of the game. And in the post-game interview, I'm doing Brooke. And I said, I think this may be the first time that two Cuban guys are going to be doing the post-game interview together. And he started laughing. He's like, oh, you're Cuban? I didn't know that. And I was like, yeah. So it just was, it changes the dynamics some, even though you don't see it in the NBA all as much. But if you got the opportunity to talk to somebody that has played in Spain or in one of the Hispanic countries, you should. Serge Ibaka is actually another good one, to be honest with you. He played in Spain for a long time. Yeah.
Goran Dragic.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. He and I get along really well. A couple more questions coming in from David Ackerman. Since there aren't a lot of Latinos covering the NBA, do you feel a big responsibility representing the Latino community? Start with you, Paulo.
If anything, you've made me also feel like I should have a bigger responsibility about it, which is good. I'm glad. No, I think.
Well, honestly, Paul, let me cut you off there. That's kind of what you do when you're 25, 26, when you're starting off, because we want to just be known for doing the damn job. And as you get older and you're realizing, like, damn, I actually have a voice here. I think that's part of the reason why we want to make sure to get you involved here. But you understand the responsibility.
That's definitely come with more time too. I think this is like year 3 for me at the Ringer. So it's like, noticing that, the disparity in terms of Latinos, not just at the Ringer, but like George was saying, everywhere else.
Hopefully be a good example, and then also just possibly be somebody that, maybe somebody looks at me and like, okay, they're writing about basketball and they're Latino, maybe I can do it too, and then maybe reach out and things like that. So I think you have to realize.
Everybody in the attending today is like, wait, like a lot of the people are young. They're looking at you, Paulo. They're like, oh, okay, how's this guy doing it? And I think that's it. But Well, Medina, as you know, we mentioned it, your background, you weren't there, but now living in LA, living in the Bay Area, and you even mentioned it, you have that empathy where you can understand. So you see the responsibility you have, don't you?
Oh, without a doubt. And, I'm blessed that I'm covering a league, the NBA, where it's very progressive. A lot of the players are very cultured. It's an international game. So even if, there's not a predominant Latino audience in terms of media and players, I think that we all share this common bond of the common viewpoints of just embracing diversity, right? But I think the other point, I definitely take the responsibility seriously. And I've been involved with NAHJ and I've gone to some of their events. But to be frank, it's also been a little bit of a challenge because of just the demands. For example, I went to the NAHJ, NABJ convention in 2016, and that was great networking. You took a lot of workshops, but as far as going to other ones, a lot of times it would overlap with the NBA schedule. They had one in Anaheim the following year, but that coincided with me leaving LA because I was moving up to the Bay for a new job. And then they had incidentally enough, an NAHJ event at the USA Today newsroom in February, but I had to be on the road for a trip. So as much as I do take, it seriously and I want to give back and embrace, it has been a challenge at certain points because some of these events, frankly, have overlapped with my day-to-day job. And maybe that's a good problem to have, like, hey, because I'm so busy with work, but I also don't want that to be at the point where I'm not having this ability to help others.
Don't worry, Medina. I'll leave my NAHJ comments alone. You are on the Bethel Vision Network, so we will take care of that. No, it's just more of, if there's a lot of people who talk about helping, but not many people are doing it. And I think what we're doing with this panel today, I tell you, this idea came out of nowhere. I was running and I'm like, let me do something. And now it's been a lot of work. And then the disparity of trying to find people who can actually fill the panels. Like George was about to fill up all the panels because he could qualify in all of them. But George, you and I talked, I even asked you the other day, you were the second ever Latino play-by-play guy on ESPN. Alvaro Martin did Summer League game, then you did. I know we don't think about that, but damn, like, really?
Yeah, it's wild. And when I was asked to do it, I told my boss, "Are you shitting me?" Like, I didn't realize. I thought he was kidding. I thought he was messing with me. And it was Summer League. And then I've done some other games beyond that. I've done some G League stuff. But yeah, look, I just think being part of all of this is opening doors, right? Like, I've said this a million times over, right? In the African-American community and really any minority community, at least when I grew up, right? I'm a 42-year-old man. I grew up a kid of the 80s and 90s. And I remember watching Stuart Scott on television on SportsCenter. And it's funny because the late, great Kobe Bryant talked about this recently in a story on The Ringer that Brian Curtis wrote about Stuart Scott and just kind of the ups and downs of his career while at ESPN. And Kobe talked about how, he would wake up in the morning, and that was back in the day when they would just re-air the 2 a.m. SportsCenter for like 8 hours after the fact until there was live TV again at like 10 in the morning on the East Coast. And yeah, I would either stay up late or I would wake up in the morning for school and watch Stuart Scott and be like, yo, that guy is incredible. And he is unlike anything I've ever seen on television. And I think that a lot of African-American kids saw that and were like, yo, I can be that guy. And he kind of opened a lot of doors. And I've always said, not that I'm trying to compare myself from a talent perspective to that dude, because you're talking about a dude that was in a different stratosphere, but just having myself on those screens, whether it's on an NBA sideline or calling a game, the sideline is obviously way more prevalent in what I do for work, and then, or the jump or around the horn or SportsCenter, all these things that I do, right? I'd much rather be at least someone that some kid, right, who's 15 or 16 years old watching the game go, oh, shit, that guy looks like me. Like, maybe I can do that. And even if it's just that, I think that we have this responsibility to try our best to help. I know we're all busy, as you talked about. I have kids, I've got a work and stuff. We're all here now at home together, and sometimes that creates its own set of challenges. But I do think that we do have a certain set of responsibility to kind of help that next generation. And whether that's what I said earlier, which is knocking on our bosses' doors and saying, yo, man, why don't you look for some people that look more like me? You know what I'm saying? Like, why don't we do that? Or just trying to help someone who wants feedback on their work. I think all those things are important.
Here's a good question. Luis Lopez, I'll answer this for you. If you want to be in this business, don't have kids young. Get the job first. I'm saying this as a divorce guy. And it's hard to maintain the work-life balance because you don't go home until after midnight and you leave at 2. So you don't see your family. And I'm telling you, it's hard. It doesn't matter how many people are supportive. It's hard to work that balance. So I'll say that because I don't want to get anybody else in trouble.
Yeah.
This one comes in.
I'll add to that real quick. I didn't have kids. My oldest is 5. I'm 42. You know what I mean? 15, I didn't have kids
I'm 41.
till I was 37 years old, and now I have 2, and we're done at 2. It also helps in my situation. My wife worked in the business. She worked in news. She understands what this life is. And I think that, if you're young out there, I'm not saying your next girlfriend or boyfriend is going to be the one. Maybe it is. You know what I'm saying? But I think that having someone, they don't have to work in the business, but someone that understands what the job entails and, how difficult and how challenging and how much of a workload you're going to have. And there's traveling involved sometimes. I think all that stuff matters too. It's, it'll make your life a lot easier in that work-life balance,
We don't have normal hours. We don't do 9 to 5 in this world. Right, Paulo?
I was just going to say, but also at the same time, it depends on the case-by-case basis because I dated somebody who's in the business and that didn't work out. So there you go.
Right. Right.
And also, rule number 2, never date anybody more famous than you. All right, here we go for this one. Good question. In the mid-30s, writing for different blogs, contributing to different accounts, doing stuff for free. At what point do you stop and you say, damn, am I done here?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And thankfully, I haven't had to make that decision as far as, hey, do I want to stick in the industry? But there were a lot of times where, you're constantly weighing, like, how patient should you be with the role you have versus looking for the next thing. And I think there's a way to being able to make it so these things aren't mutually exclusive. Like, you got to always concentrate on making sure that you're keeping your current bosses happy with good work. But you're also, to the point I was saying earlier about working hard, but you have to work smart. You have to think about the end game. And so I think the best way to put it is you're auditioning to keep your job, but also get your next job. And how do you do that? Do good work and network as you do that. So hopefully if you're mastering those 2 things, that will increase the odds where you don't have to make that decision of, hey, is it worth it for me to continue with this? But there have definitely been points in my career path where I had to weigh, hey, should I stick it out being a blogger with the LA Times, or should I go to the Daily News and be a beat writer? Am I fine with just, staying in LA and writing, covering the Lakers, or do I want to try to challenge myself and cover another team? And I've always had that growth mindset where I'm not going to leave just for the sake of leaving. Like, I want to do good work and create stability, but as long as I don't have any family obligations, if there is an opportunity in front of me that'll be more,
there's
more high paying, but
people take
more importantly, be able to expand my bandwidth, I'll take it and not let any geography inhibit me from doing that.
Yeah. Every year, thousands of kids graduate wanting to chase and become Mark Medina, George Sedano. And Paulo, you graduated a few years ago. How many of your classmates that thought they were badass at Annenberg TV who are now 25 are like, life insurance ain't so bad. Real estate ain't so bad because it sucks making $22,000 doing a prep football game.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's a hard thing to say, but you can't overstate it, which is that it's hard. It's like a limited business. Like, I feel that's part of why I feel extremely blessed and fortunate to even have this opportunity, because I know that there are a lot of people who I worked with who, at other schools even, or even just within the media now, who are struggling or who are, still looking to catch like a break or anything like that. And that's something you have to, I think, realize if you're younger as you go in, that, there's a chance that this won't work out. And even for me, there's still a chance that this won't work out, and
you have to, we all will.
But yeah, exactly. So it's like, but at the end of the day, I do think, if your work is good and if you are willing to work hard, you're going to give yourself a better shot than most. And I think that's the way you have to look at it.
And George, you said this on my Living the Dream podcast a few years ago. You were in Miami, you had a sweet job, but at the same time, you got let go and you had to go work as a delivery guy, right?
So my first work in the business was right out of school. I was working at a mom and pop radio station, and look, like a lot of mom and pop ventures, it went out of business. And I was also a snot-nosed punk, and I had a big mouth, and I went after a lot of big fish, and the sharks ended up biting me back, and I was kind of blackballed for a minute. And it wasn't until another station popped up from a larger company that took a chance on me. But yeah, I spent 9 months working for my friend who owned a courier business. And the worst part of working for a courier business for a guy who wanted to be on the radio at that time was you got to listen to a lot of radio when you're driving around, and you're listening and going, shit, I'm better than that guy. I know I'm better than that guy. And that guy's got the job that I should have. But you got to stay focused. And I still believed that I had that chance, that all I needed was the crack in the door to get through. And, I was able to make the most of it, in a very short amount of time thereafter.
Yeah, it's and I'll tell you this right now, as the guy who created this panel, is moderating this, and my hashtag has always been living the dream. I'm in a fucking garage right now with no job, looking at my unemployment papers. And I've been here since 2000, my first ever internship. So divorced with 2 kids and child support. And I'm being completely honest with you. But I can easily say, you know what? I'm going to stop this and go be a teacher. And I've had a great run. I've had a great career. I've had a bunch of good stuff. Or you could keep on fighting. Fortunately, I drive a car that's 11 years old on purpose. I wear free clothes on purpose. It's don't try to floss what you don't have. Don't worry about what Paulo's doing or what George is doing or what the other guy is doing. It's focus on yourself. The job is amazing. Getting it sucks. And having other people talk like this to your bosses about you sucks. But stay like this, stay locked in, stay focused. Like I said, the job is amazing. But hey, this pandemic came down. What happens? I'm over here calling George like, hey, I'm going to do this podcast. I'm going to teach myself how to do video podcasts. I'm going to teach myself to do this, and that. A lot of people are like, oh, I ain't doing anything. Out of sight, out of mind. Don't be out of sight. Don't be out of mind.
To your point, I think it's a great time to be creative right now. And that's one of the questions Nicolette sent us here. It says, what advice do you have for people who are about to graduate from school this year, aside from not having kids? And it's just be creative. Like, use this opportunity for yourself. Get on, if you want to be a talk show host, right? Whether it's on television or on radio or wherever, get on a Zoom and practice, right? Post the stuff on YouTube. Let your friends see it. And only make sure the friends that you see it aren't the ones that are always going to pat you on the ass. Find the friends that are going to tell you the truth. Like, hey, that was good. No, that sucked. And that way you learn, because listen, even now, okay, I've been on radio for 20 years, and there are things I try on the show, and I'm like, I don't know if it's going to work, and I'm going to try it. I don't care. If it sucked, it sucked. We won't do it again, or we'll tinker with it to see if it's better. And if not, so be it. And if it hits, it hits. But you got to take chances. And again, because of the pandemic, because we're all at home, whether that's firing up your own podcast, and there's a million ways to do that now. You literally can just grab your iPad or iPhone and hit the recording app and start doing it with someone one-on-one or on a phone call. Like, it's super easy to do all that stuff with technology now, stuff that at least I didn't have when I was coming out of school. So I do think that there are opportunities for you guys to take advantage of stuff now more so than ever.
Good question from Angel Rodriguez. Has this ever happened, and how did you deal with it? Being called the diversity hire. Paulo, I'll start with you. You're young. You're the only one over there.
I haven't been called that per se, but it's at times felt that way because of, there's not that many other people. Latinos at the Ringer. There's a couple, obviously Shay, and there's one in social media working there as well. I do think I don't know, maybe this is if you are a minority thing, you do notice that what happens, I think, is like, even though people may not call it such, it's happening, because you notice how if it feels like, oh, we don't have enough people of this kind, to put it that way, then it's like, oh, then that's what they'll hire. And it's hard, because it's like, oh, it's great that they're hiring those people, but sometimes it does feel like, oh, are they just doing it to appease, like a quota of some sort, or is it because they actually think that your work is good? And I think
with me at ESPN Radio, I was the dude working behind the scenes, and they're like, hey, we'll give you a shot 2007. I knew, nobody told me, but it's like, hey, let's get a little guy in here because he's going to work cheaper. But what do they tell me? You're only working Friday, Saturdays. Fuck that. I went to games Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Sunday. Like, once you're in the door, forget how you get in. You got to work even harder. So once you're in the door, work harder than anybody else. And, like, don't be going and saying, like, oh, yeah, this is that. You can't be the rebel rouser. But at the same time, know that if you fuck up, it's your fault.
Yeah, thankfully, I've never been called a diversity hire other than maybe Beto playfully teasing me every now and then. But I've always kept in the back of my mind, not just, oh, a diversity hire, but, oh, you got hired because you're young and cheap, whatever. I just wanted to always try to make every employer not regret the decision and come at it from, hey, I'm going to bust my ass and do all the things like Beto would give me a hard time about, like going to every practice and shoot around, but then not just be the guy that's known as working hard, like the guy that's also known of being a self-starter and enterprising and creative. And I felt like, you know, it's definitely allowed me to give myself some sort of calling card while giving myself time to work on some of my weaknesses. And even in the LA Times case where, you know, I loved my time there and I owe a debt of gratitude to the folks there with Mike James and Randy Harvey. They had a round of layoffs where, you know, they let me go, but then they rehired me back 3 weeks later to run their Lakers blog. And I think because of that, it fell under this very weird set of circumstances where, you know, hey, they had to make tough cuts because that's what's going on in the newspaper business. But it wasn't so much of an indictment of what I did. It's more of, hey, a reflection of the LA Times has so many great people, number one. But number two, hey, we'll give you another opportunity. Well, maybe this will be a better avenue for you to flourish. And so I always try to find that new gig, do whatever I can to overcome the deficiency of the lack of experience with that gig and overcome the learning curve and then get me to that next door that hopefully opens by the time the timing is right.
There it is. It basically, at the end of the day, like Latino mom, a trabajar, right? Just fucking work. It's like we got no choice, right? This is a good one from Fidel Martinez, who actually runs the LA Times social media account. Real smart guy from the Rio Grande Valley. What was the first moment where you felt like you had it? So, Dono, let's go to you. Like the hard work is paying off.
You know, there's, you know, look, I think the strange part about me is I don't think I've had it, right? Like, I think that there's still more places to be. But I have also been told that I should occasionally just take a breath and enjoy what I've gotten.
Yes,
and
I tell you that.
To Paolo's point earlier, I think that, you know, I've been super blessed. But yeah, look, I think that working on the NBA broadcasts, right? I get to work. Here's the deal. All right. The first game I got on sidelines on ESPN, I got to work with Mike Breen. Okay. Mike Breen is the voice of the NBA. All right. He's been the voice of the NBA since 2006. He's been calling the NBA finals since then. He's also one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. Like, this is a guy, and not everyone is like this. Okay. But this was a guy that I knew a little bit because when I was in Miami, I covered LeBron and those teams and whatnot. So I would see him constantly and I would have him on the radio show at times. But when I was working with him, like, he said to me, hey, so we're working with an old school producer today who doesn't like to use the reporter a lot. I'm sure you got a bunch of ideas. If you have any issues and he's giving you any issues, just text me and I'll tell him, hey, I was talking to George earlier and he had this idea. We should do it. Because he knows he's the voice of the NBA. He's got that pull. No producer is going to tell him no in that spot. And just having that, right, someone like that have your back, I think that kind of made me feel great and made me feel like, okay, I am looked at as an equal here. Another incident with him, as a matter of fact, it just happened this past season. And I was doing a game in November at the new Chase Center, Warriors Celtics. It was actually a really tight game, one of the few the Warriors had early in the year. They actually played pretty well, I thought, on nationally televised games. That's when they actually played close games. So in the third quarter, for those that don't know, the interviews, the way we do it on sidelines is at the end of the first quarter, we talk to the road coach. And at the end of the third quarter, we talk to the home coach. So there's about like 3 or 4 minutes left in the third quarter. And I'm sitting there at the scorer's table and I'm watching Steve Kerr and he's subbing out Draymond. And Draymond and him are talking and he's patting him on the chest. And I could read his lips saying, I love you. And clearly this is a crap season already for the Warriors at that point. So I said, you know what? I'm going to ask him about that. And I before the camera was rolling, I said, hey, Steve, I saw this interaction. Do you mind me asking you that question? And he's like, yeah, man, sure, no problem. So I asked him the question. I posed it how I saw them, right, having this interaction. And I asked him, what was that about? And he said it. He had a great answer about it. And as I get back to my seat, I have a text from Breen that says, man, George, you're really good at this job. So when a guy like that validates you, you know what I mean? Like, that's when you're like, shit, I've made it. So there have been a few instances like that, but they've involved him pretty much both times, you know, and that group, when you work with that A team on our NBA broadcast with Breen and Van Gundy and Mark and Tim Corrigan, who's the producer and runs NBA, like when those guys are telling you, man, you got this shit rolling right now, you are comfortable in your own skin, and you're making your mark, that's when you feel like you've arrived. You know, I've done talk shows forever. I've done a lot of things. I've done TV talk shows, all that stuff. That stuff is fun, don't get me wrong. But when you're validated by people who are considered the best of the best at what they do, I think that's kind of the moment.
That's awesome. And Mike Breen started off his career covering the courthouses in upstate New York before he went into radio. So it's you all got to start somewhere and get going. Paulo, how about you? When you got your first check?
Yeah, I mean, similar to George, like, obviously, like, I feel like you always kind of have to, I feel like you kind of have to feel like you don't have it, so you keep looking for it and keep improving. I mean, I would say that getting the Ringer internship was a big thing for me, you know, just getting that. But obviously I knew that that's sort of where it all just restarted again. And then as far as like similar to George, like somebody I read a lot while I was in high school and like trying to figure out how to do this was Lee Jenkins. And so, you know, I wrote this Kawhi Paul George feature over this past summer where I sort of went back to Palmdale and Moreno Valley where they grew up and talked to people around them. And I think we were sitting at a game or something and he was nearby and he said hi and he like complimented the story and said, you know, that I've been doing great work. And I, like, for me as somebody who grew up reading him and like pretty much in some ways I'm trying to emulate it, even though I think he's kind of on his own tier. That was probably like a big moment for me too as well.
Yeah, Lee Jenkins went from Sports Illustrated to Clippers front office, making a bunch of money now.
Yeah, shit, I need that job.
Okay, he's a consultant. He's not allowed to talk to the media, and nobody knows his job, but he's getting paid a bunch. There it is. Medina, what about you?
Okay, so I have always these like series of moments where you feel like hard work's paying off, but then you're equally humbled because then it's about, okay, well, you got to prove that you're worthy of this. So you go back to when I first got hired at the LA Times, that partly came about because, hey, I was applying for MetPro. I sent out 100 applications to all places all over the country after I graduated. And also, hey, I got good internships. But then once I got that, it was like, okay, well, now you have to prove that you're worthy of it. And then when I got let go at the Times, you know, I thought, hey, well, bummer this didn't work out. But everyone on staff was so supportive and so impressed with my potential that they were advocating for me to get that Lakers position. And then at that point, it was like, oh, well, now I got to prove that I can handle that. And then once I got the Daily News, it was like, hey, well, I got to prove now that I can cover it as a beat writer. Same thing with the Warriors and relying on those past experiences. Same thing happened when I got this USA Today job where I'm their NBA writer now. I'm their West Coast guy, mostly because I previously covered 2 high-profile teams on the West Coast. And I remember earlier this season, I saw Kobe at a game, and he was saying, hey, like, you're a superstar now, right? And I told him, I was like, I got to prove it. Like, this is my first year on the national gig here. So, right. So, like, every time there is that point of this new growth of, hey, I made it, I still feel like I got to remind myself, hey, you know what? You got to prove that you're worthy of this one or else this will end.
Well, that's cool. I think we've had some great stories, and I think you've all made it. Paulo, you're young. You're all right. Medina, you know what? You really impressed me today. And so the story of the Latino Media All-Stars, as we're wrapping it up, and thanks to everybody paying attention to all your questions. And before we get going, if you have any way of reaching out to Sedano, Paulo, or Mark Medina, do it. Tell him you came from this webinar, and they're going to reach out to you. That's it. Like, yeah, I know we didn't get to all the questions, but just reach out to them.
Yeah. So the email for me, if you want to email me, it's George, like Jorge, Sedano, Sedano @ESPN.com.
George.sedano@ESPN.com.
Twitter bio, so you can just email me there or DM me, I guess.
No,
and I don't have kids, so I have more time.
He doesn't answer. He don't answer his DMs. So what your email is?
Email me.
So your email is on your Twitter. All right. So if you guys are looking for the next Ringer internship, ask Paulo. Be like, hey, when is it opening up?
Yeah, ask him if Bill Simmons is going to hire you. That's what you should ask.
Medina, your email or?
Yeah, those already.
Yeah, pretty simple. It's mmedina, MEDINA @usatoday.com.
There it is. So the story why about the Latino Media All-Stars, let me wrap this up for you guys. Maybe 10 years ago, we are in the Lakers media room. 2008 NBA Finals. That's what it is. Mark Spears, from now at ESPN, was at that time working for the Denver Post, J.A. Adande, and we were playing Count the Minorities in the Room. I kid you not, in the media room. As a joke, right? Because we were all good. It was like, wow, what's going on here? And then I threw out, well, let's play Find the Mexicans. It was me. J.A. grew up in L.A. Spears is from Oakland. He's like, man, we're Mexican too. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Us three right here, we're the Latino Media All-Stars. As a joke.
Right.
Spears and J.A. Adande became the Latino Media All-Stars. So on Twitter, I'll go and say, hey, he's a member of Latino All-Stars. And I've always said that Mark Medina's not in. Well, because Mark Medina wasn't there with Mark Spears and J.A. Adande. So for years, the joke was the Latino Media All-Stars had no Latinos because there was no Latinos in the media. That's what the joke was. But we're growing, we're coming. And I think today, Medina, you've been inducted into the Latino.
I got inducted, yes.
Welcome, Medina.
Thank you.
If anything, this is all a ruse for this. But thank you guys very much. If you guys have any questions, make sure you reach out to them. But Paulo, Mark, and George, any final words from you guys?
Just grind, man. Like, I think everyone's talked about that, but I just got to emphasize that. Just grind. And look, if you can work harder than the next guy, Mark was just talking about Kobe, right? Like, as cliche as it sounds, right? That Mamba mentality, just be like, I don't give a shit what anybody else thinks. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to try stuff. I'm going to get creative. I'm not going to sit here and get down on myself if something doesn't work, and try everything. Try to write, try to get in front of a camera. This is what Zoom is for. Do a podcast, do everything. See what comes natural and comfortable for you. Maybe it's stuff behind the scenes. Maybe you're a great editor, right? Maybe you're a great producer. There's so many things to this business that are more than just in front of a microphone or a camera. And I would say just try everything.
Paulo?
George said, but also just I would say just really focus on the writing aspect of it, because even whether you do TV, podcasts, or any sort of media, I think you have to have that writing skill, because that'll translate over anything and over any medium. So I would say just focus on that above all.
Medina?
Yeah, extending the Kobe metaphor that George was saying, basically relish your makes, but don't allow that to let you get complacent and not get back on defense, right? But if you're missing the shot, what did Kobe do? He kept shooting. The bottom line is we're all going to have our successes and our failures on the business. There's going to be jobs we get. There's going to be jobs we don't get. But the common denominator is how you continue to build off of the foundation that you've already built. And that should be universal regardless of how successful you are or, any hardships that you go through. The more that you stay disciplined with that, the more likely the odds will be in your favor that the old adage of when preparation meets opportunity will bounce your way.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks to everybody involved that signed up for this. And once again, don't share this anywhere. Don't record it. Don't post it anywhere. Doing this for free out of goodness of our hearts to go for it. This was just for you. I didn't want to post it on YouTube because, I could easily charge for this. People told me, how much are you charge? I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm charging this? No. This is for the 33 people who registered and came in and checked it out. So you got something special because you'll never be able to chance to hear these three guys at the same time. Also, more things this week. Tuesday, there is an all-female panel. You don't have to be a guy. You don't have to be a girl if you want to go and check this one out, because you can hear the different perspective about being a Latina. Claudia Trejos from DAZN, Sierra Santos out of Fox Phoenix, and also Serena Morales out of the Rams and former ESPN Sports Center. Wednesday, we got the baseball one and the NFL one. Thursday is the play-by-play one. So if you have any kind of ambition about doing play-by-play, you think there's no NBA reporters are Latino? NBA basketball play-by-play? You talk to him, George, in Summer League. And then on Friday, a real one that just got added, If you're a writer, check it out. Angel Rodriguez from the LA Times, Ileana Roman from the Orlando Sentinel, the sports editors, they will be giving you advice. So check that out. All kinds of great things. Go to my Twitter, Duran Sports, and you can see it there. So for Mark Medina, Paulo Getty, and George Sedano, and Jorge Sedano, thank you guys very much. And you know what? Chase your dream. Adios, people. Dale.
All right. See you guys. Take care. Adios. Good luck, guys.